Hello and welcome to Toronto, Canada, and a special edition of the Kalb Report, a public policy forum co-sponsored by the George Washington University, the National Press Club, and the Shorenstein Center on the Press, Politics, and Public Policy at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. I'm Marvin Kalb, a senior fellow at the Shorenstein Center. This edition is special for two reasons. We've taken the Kalb Report on the road. We are in Canada. That's reason one. The second reason is that our program today is sponsored and supported by the Graduate Management Admission Council, GMAC, as it's called, and this is its annual industry conference. Our program is being carried live by CIUT Radio and taped for later use by TV Ontario, XM Satellite Radio, and PBS Channel 32 in Washington, D.C., and by the Voice of America, which hopes to use parts of the program in India and China. Our title is our subject today, Global Currency, the Value and Values of the MBA. If you don't know what an MBA stands for, you shouldn't be here. For those of you who aren't here, it is a Master of Business Administration, 121,000 of which were awarded in 2002, 4 times more than were handed out 30 years earlier, which suggests to me it's a growth industry, or seems to be. And here to discuss this subject are 3 experts approaching it from 3 different perspectives. To my right is Roger L. Martin, Dean of the Joseph Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto, a position he's held since 1998. His research has taken him into such areas as global competitiveness, integrative thinking, and organizational learning. He is the author of The Responsibility Virus, and he has written extensively for the Harvard Business Review, the Globe and Mail, Time, and other publications. To my left is Edith A. Hunt, who is the co-chief operating officer of the Human Capital Management Division of Goldman Sachs. Her responsibilities are global recruiting, training, and diversity. She joined Goldman Sachs in 1984, became managing director in 1999, and a partner in 2004. And finally, to my immediate right, Ronald J. Alsop, a news editor and senior writer for the Wall Street Journal. He is the proud author of a new book, The 18 Immutable Laws of Corporate Reputation: Creating, Protecting, and Repairing Your Most Valuable Asset. He's also the editor of the annual Wall Street Journal Guide to the Top Business Schools. Well, welcome. And we are discussing the value and the values of the MBA degree, and I want to start with Dean Martin. You're responsible for turning out the MBAs at the University of Toronto. What specifically are you looking for in your students now? What qualities, what characteristics?
Well, we want to have students who've already shown some leadership and who want to accelerate their career, take that career farther than they might have otherwise, faster than they might have otherwise, and are interested in taking a perspective on that, an academic perspective that says there's some things they can learn in a couple of years at business school that will do that for them.
But are these people who have already had training in that area, who have been in the field for a certain period of time?
Yes. On average, our students, and the students of most of the top business schools, have about 5 years of full-time work experience and an undergraduate degree. So the undergraduate degree is most often in some field other than business. So
has there been anything new that you want now that you didn't want 10 years ago?
Well, I'd say we certainly are way more interested than 10 years ago in students that are interested in the international economy, that may have had international experience. That's certainly something that has been enhanced.
Ms. Hunt, when an MBA comes to Goldman Sachs and knocks at your door and says, I'd like a job, have you noticed any differences in the kind of student with the kind of qualifications coming to you now as contrasted with, as I asked Dean, say, 10 years ago?
that's a very interesting question. I think today's students are much more specific about their career goals and their ambitions. So I think they are much better trained, they're much better aware of the many different kinds of opportunities that exist across an investment bank. And I think they come to the job interview being very, very well prepared, and in some circumstances almost a little bit over-prepared, because I think the schools have done a very good job through their career services in terms of getting them ready for the interview process.
And Mr. Alsop, you are the only one of the panelists who does not have an MBA degree, which probably, I mean, among us, and I don't have one either. And that probably means that you have the best perspective on this. So, in your judgment, what are the largest differences that one would note in the MBA degree today, the student, the product, arriving at the door of Goldman Sachs, for example, and that student of 5, 10, 15 years ago?
Well, I think the one area is experience. That clearly, over the last decade or so, the amount of work experience that MBAs bring to the table has increased significantly, and that's what companies are really looking for. When I do our survey, they say they really want more and more, not less, work experience, and they want these students to be able to hit the ground running, as they put it. So I'd say that's one of the biggest differences, is the amount of work experience they bring prior to the MBA. Another one, I think, is probably they're much more focused on a career specialized in what they want to do. They're looking to switch careers oftentimes, and I think that schools have sort of made their mindset such that they actually start looking for their first internship before they even open a book. I mean, it's a very career-focused degree, and these students are just, they're really, that's why we do our survey based on what recruiters think, because these students are very focused on that career and getting a higher salary and a better job after they graduate. So those are some of the differences, I would say.
So the value of the MBA is that, as I understand you, it's giving the student an extra credential.
Yes.
It makes it easier for them to get a job, I would imagine.
Yes.
And it probably increases their salary levels.
Yes. It is. Again, it is. It wasn't for a few years here. There was a very bad job market, which created an image problem for the MBA that I think it's still struggling to get over, because around 2001, the job market really went south, and students were finding it hard, some of them, to even end up with a job at graduation, or certainly a better job was harder to come by than the one they had before they went to school. Now the job market is coming back, as we know, with the economy improving, but it's still got this issue of, is the investment in the MBA degree worth it? Are you going to really come out with a better,
and your answer to that is what? Is it worth it?
I think, based on all the talking I've done over the past 5 or 6 years with students and professors and recruiters, I think long-term it's worth it. I don't know yet that you're going to get a big payoff from it, because I think the job market is still coming back. And in our survey, for example, this year, I think only 45% of recruiters said they were going to pay more this year than they did last year to MBA graduates, which is a significant number, but still not what you would expect in a good economy. So I think that it will come back, and I think it does have long-term value.
Dean Martin?
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, that having been said, it had been a soft job market for 2002 and 2003 exiting candidates. But I think the way the prospective MBA students look at it is, what will happen to my salary from my last salary before business school and my first out of business school? And if you just use the numbers from the surveys, Business Week would say the students coming out of our school have an 85% higher salary the first year out than the last year before business school. And so the return on investment for that is actually huge. Now, it wasn't as huge as in the frothy years of 1999, 2000, but it is actually quite a huge return in that sense.
But Dean Martin, I have a feeling you may not mean it the way it came out as it hit me, but you're all sounding as if the degree is simply a way to make a lot more money. And that what it is that you're learning in this school, what kind of value systems you're picking up in this school, seem to be in a secondary position to the quest for a higher salary. Is that what you're really saying?
Well, I do think the students have a quest for a better career where they can have opportunities that they might not have had they not had the learnings that they'd get out of the business school experience. I think the easiest way for anybody to sort of track that is on the basis of salaries, which are to a certain degree commensurate with the level of responsibility you have. But I would agree, it's not a wonderful and all-encompassing measure. But I think it really is thereafter. These are folks who really want to have an interesting job, make a contribution, and this is a way to get there.
But I would like to deal with this making a contribution, but I want to do that a little later in our discussion. But right now, I'd like to stay with the thrust of where we are and ask all of you three basic questions, because of my own research for this discussion. These three questions came up over and over again. Who should get an MBA? I mean, what kind of student are you really looking for there? Second, what are they taught? What are the basics, the finance, strategy, marketing? Is that an adequate curriculum? And third, does the current curriculum prepare the MBA for the challenges and dynamics that face countries in the new millennium? And I'd like to start with Ms. Hunt. Can you address the question, what are they taught, that middle question? What are they taught, and why is what they taught, this finance marketing, to be the central focus?
Sure. The value of an MBA from our perspective as a corporate employer is that you get people who are well-grounded across a wide variety of business disciplines that you wouldn't get if you had someone that you hired directly out of undergraduate college and put in a seat and became very masterful in a very narrow field. So the person that gets an MBA comes out with a thorough understanding of organizational behavior, operation systems, accounting. They will get marketing skills in addition to the finance, which is primarily the technical expertise that we're looking for. However, we'll take people with their technical expertise and we'll put them through more rigorous training. So to ensure that they have the kind of financial background that they're looking for, but we're looking for someone who has an integrated perspective, because to be truly successful in business, you have to be able to see around corners. You have to understand how your business is going to impact and be impacted by all of the other pieces of our business in the world outside of us. So I think that learning and the ability to go down, 1, 2, 3 courses across a wide variety of disciplines is really quite useful for people who we expect to be leaders of our company in the future.
Okay, Mr. Alsop, do you believe that that curriculum, on the basis of your investigations, that curriculum does indeed prepare the student, the new MBA, with the equipment, the intellectual equipment necessary to help a company meet the challenges of today?
Well, I think all those are essential, and I think most schools do it very well. But the big deficiency that I pick up in my research is that the schools haven't done a good enough job preparing students in the area of communications, interpersonal skills, and leadership. Those are the 3 big areas where recruiters in particular tell me that they find students lacking, and that they think the schools really haven't focused enough on those so-called soft skills.
What about the student at the University of Toronto's in the School of Management? What kind of person am I apt to meet if I drop by there tomorrow morning?
I think you'd meet folks who are around 27, 28, 29 years old. They would be from 38 countries, about 42% of them from outside Canada. Be interested in a wide variety of fields, including more recently, a lot of them interested in nonprofit organizations, but a bunch interested in investment banks, consulting firms, quite a wide variety.
But you have been quoted as saying, Dean Martin, this is a grand opportunity to lead the degree into a second generation. Now, for those of us who don't know what the first generation was, why don't you tell us first what that first generation was, and why is this a grand opportunity? Because that suggests to me that you're not quite satisfied with what it is that you've got now.
No, I'm not. I'm not at all satisfied. And I think you actually have a good handle on the first generation. It was in your description earlier of some marketing and some finance, etc. I think the first generation of business education started out of a world where it converted from being a trade, a craft, where you went and apprenticed with somebody, to an academic enterprise. And one of the decisions that was made early in the history of business education was to split it into these functional areas and teach each of the functions. The problem, the good side of that was we were able to create some knowledge in each of these functions and some academic and discipline and theory and the like. The bad side of it is, as Peter Drucker says, there's no such thing as a marketing problem or a finance problem. There are only business problems that cross, as we said earlier, that cross all of those fields. And I think business schools have not taken up the challenge of teaching a theory of integrating across those disciplines and teaching students that, in part because it's harder. They got comfortable with the notion of going deeper and deeper in these individual silos. And that's not what Goldman Sachs is looking for. That's not what your employers sound like they're looking for. And that's why I'm a critic of what I consider traditional business education, because it hasn't aspired to go that next level.
Ms. Hunt, tell me about one aspect of this overall problem. I read that women comprise only about 25–30% of the students at a business school, and that for minorities, Hispanics, blacks, only about 6%. First of all, is that accurate as far as you know?
Those statistics are approximately accurate.
Now, how do you account for that?
Well, particularly with respect to female representation at business schools, there are a lot of factors that go into this, but I think you could sum them up into 3 categories. Firstly, there's been a lack of role models and encouragement for women, for young women throughout the course of their lives.
Role models in the sense of corporate heads?
Corporate heads,
professors,
university professors, deans of business schools, and even as women are going through guidance at college, you don't have very many people saying, take the GMAT exam, apply to business school, think about this as an opportunity for you. So that's one reason. I think the second reason is women have generally proved to be more risk averse about things, and that comes into a lot. They're risk averse about going into financial debt because many of these MBA degrees are quite expensive to finance. At the same time, you know, given that the average MBA student has at least 5 years of work experience, it means stepping out of an income, not being sure what kind of job you're going to be able to get when you get back in, and also a little bit of risk aversion about what's the experience going to be like when I get to school in terms of, you know, do I have the quantitative background that I need to be successful? So that would be the second category, I think, is risk aversion.
And the third? And
the third category is the fact that business schools want you to have 5 years of work experience, which means that just you are older, you're 27 years old, unlike law school or medical school that you're attending when you're 22 or 23 years old and getting out of the way. Young women when they're 27 or 28 are thinking about, or have already become married, they're thinking about families, they're thinking about doing a rigorous program, entering a job that they've sacrificed a lot to do, and they're kind of thinking about how do I coordinate getting my MBA degree with the rest of my life, having a family, starting a family, and advancing.
Now, my experience, limited as it is that women are much better at handling money than men. So I don't really understand the number. I guess that's what throws me. I thought there'd be 90% women and 10% men.
Well, it's, we wish it were true, and I think there are many companies, it's an agenda item for many schools. There are organizations that have come together. I'm the chairman of a board of an organization called Forte Foundation, which has been set up specifically for the purpose to try to set up programs and education and build awareness. And we talk about the value proposition of an MBA for women. And there's a lot of demystification that needs to be done for people who think that it's an unfriendly environment, MBA programs are not looking for people unless they've already been analysts, at investment bank before going. So there are a lot of myths out there that need to, that we're working to try to address and provide the role modeling and provide the messaging and provide the financial assistance that can help increase the representation.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Alsop, on this business of a first generation and a second generation. Is this something that you come upon in your reporting of business schools? Do you have a feeling shared by Dean Martin that there is a need for the second curriculum, the second generation, this new approach to what it is that the business schools are teaching?
Well, I think it makes good sense, and I do hear some comments about people being more able to tackle the problem, not just from one perspective, but from marketing, finance, operations, all these perspectives. I hear it from recruiters sometimes, but I have to say, again, I'm talking mostly from the recruiter's perspective, I don't hear that issue a lot. I really feel that, as I said earlier, it's these soft skills that they really feel that schools have to put more focus on. I mean,
that's their basic criticism of what currently exists.
That's their main criticism by far. And it's like some of these.
And what do they mean by, you mentioned before, communication?
All right, this is one of their biggest complaints. They just say that students don't know how to write anymore. That they get these students who, they send them letters of application that read like emails to a friend, full of grammatical errors, spelling errors. And I hear this repeatedly from recruiters at big companies like Whirlpool. In fact, Whirlpool told me that they actually have started a new exercise when they interview MBAs where they tell them they have to make a 10-minute oral presentation of their resume, just to see how well they can speak and how they can go beyond what's on the written page, because both their oral and their written communication is just so weak right now. And
it's fascinating. I mean, you're talking and indeed preaching to the converted, because I've always had the personal view that the introduction of the computer and the introduction of the concept of the email has absolutely destroyed the human mind. Not totally, of course, but destroyed it sufficiently to interfere with the creative capacity to sit down and draft something that's interesting and innovative and different.
Right.
Maybe even have paragraphs in it.
Exactly.
That, that you'd be proud to show your grandmother, that kind of thing.
Not to mention persuasive.
That's right. That's right. Do you said 42% before of your students are not from Canada. Did I hear you right?
In the most recent class, sure. Yeah.
Right.
So it's been around that number.
And of that 42%, are most of them from the United States?
No, actually, not a very big percentage. The biggest percentages would be India, China, Latin America. We would draw more from those
And explain
areas.
to us why, Dean Martin, there are so many, 42% is almost 1 in 2. Then explain to us why there are so many that are coming from India, from China at this point. What is happening? What dynamic is new?
Well, I think both of those economies, as you well know, are really booming, and I think they're both becoming just generally more business-oriented economies with reforms in China and in India. And I think because of that, there's the young folks in those countries are saying we needed more business education, and North America is one place they come. And Toronto is a very, very diverse, multicultural city. It's one of the most diverse cities on the planet, actually. And so I think we have a disproportionately large number of international students because they feel quite comfortable in the city, or at least that's what they tell us. They tell us one of the reasons they came was because of the city.
And Ms. Hunt, you've just come back from a trip to Europe, and you have a responsibility to deal with this issue, the international recruiting as well, right? Do you find the same thing, that a lot more of the MBAs coming into Goldman Sachs and to Goldman Sachs's all across the U.S. economic environment, that they are coming from India, from China, from abroad?
We find that they are an increasing percentage. If you're looking at a past 10 or 15-year perspective, I think, yes, that's true. Our Asian business is growing dramatically. We have just opened our office in India. We have just gotten a license to do business in China and have opened that office. And we've been doing business out of Hong Kong and Taipei and in Taiwan and in Japan for several years. So between recruitment in key European schools and recruiting international students that are attending U.S. schools, that has been, we need to look like our customers, and we need to look like the world that we serve. So we have been increasing our international recruitment.
Do you know roughly what the percentage would be of international MBAs coming into the employ of Goldman Sachs?
I would say it's probably on the order of 35%.
Really? And 10, 20 years ago would have been?
Oh, it would have been probably under 10%.
Under 10. So if I am a young, bright Chinese student interested in business, I should be knocking at your door.
You should be. But we also recruit young, bright Chinese students from universities in China as well. So we do.
And I was just getting to that.
We do extend our recruitment activities.
Are we finding, Dean Martin, are we finding, Mr. Alsop as well, are we finding that China and India and other places around the world, put aside the US and Canada for a moment, are developing their own business schools? Are they following a certain model that is distinctly theirs, or are they simply picking up the University of Toronto model and implanting it in Beijing?
Well, you know, Marvin, they're doing a bit of both. They certainly are in China. Because in China, until the reforms, there were no business schools, as opposed to India, where they've been business schools for a long time. They're utilizing North American business schools to help jumpstart the process, so doing lots of joint ventures and the like. So I think in China you'd see lots of influence of North American style business schools because of the partnerships, and they're growing it so fast. The number of spaces in business schools in China is growing at a phenomenal rate. It took America about 90 years to go from 0 to 100,000 MBAs, and it's going to take China about 10 years to go from 0 to about 40,000. So it's real growth. India has a longer tradition of having business schools, the IIMs.
What is that?
Indian Institute of Management, a series of them, and they're excellent quality, and I'd say they have maybe more of an Indian flavor because they've evolved over a long period of time in that economy.
What's happening in your research, Mr. Alsop? What's happening with this international dimension now? The number of foreign students coming to the United States or Canada, that has increased, stayed about the same?
Well, it's actually slipped a bit in recent years. Partly because I think after September 11th, getting a visa to come into the U.S. to study became more complicated, and from some countries like China and India in particular, I heard from the business schools. I think that's going to pass that issue of getting a visa to come here. But the one issue that doesn't seem to change much, which I interview foreign students who are studying in the U.S., and they're so frustrated by the fact that many U.S. employers simply won't interview them.
Why?
Well, for one thing, they have to sponsor them for a work visa, which I don't know if that's just an excuse for other reasons, but employers seem to not want to do that, and that's the reason they give. One woman I interviewed recently from China said, you know, she would do all this research on a company, use alumni from the school to connect into the company. First question I'd ask, do you need us to sponsor you for a visa? When she said yes, that was the end of the interview. They didn't care about her credentials or anything. Some people say there's a bit of a, I don't know, patriotic feeling, you know, to hire Americans first, that's hurt some international students' prospects. But it clearly is a big issue, and I think Goldman Sachs and other investment banks are not that way as much. Management consulting firms, I think, are more open, and now that those two industries are hiring more, it's getting a little better. But a lot of companies still, in our survey, over a third of the recruiters responding said they simply won't interview international MBA students because they feel there are enough U.S. students to fill their needs.
Dean Martin, do you encourage a student from, I'm saying India now, but it could be in any foreign country, after getting a good education at the University of Toronto, do you encourage them to go back to their country and take the knowledge that they have picked up at the university and apply it for the improvement of their own society?
I would say we go with what the student is interested in, and it's fairly evident pretty quickly because the ones who want to stay tend to apply for landed immigrant status, and it's a little bit easier in Canada, so they can get that typically by the time they graduate, and so they want to stay, and we're fine with that. And the ones who don't go through that process and apply are the ones who we know are heading back, so we encourage both and try to help them with jobs. Regardless of which of those paths they take, but it's pretty clear pretty quickly
which way they want to go.
Which way they want to go for at least the bulk of them.
Is there any preference at Goldman Sachs, and I'm using Goldman Sachs because you're here representing it, but in your own experience, is there any preference for, as Mr. Alsop was saying, for having the American MBA as opposed to the Indian-born MBA?
I don't think there's a preference so much as this is sort of where we recruit, and we do recruiting as a business, and the cost of recruiting is sort of visiting schools and being on campus and interviewing people. We do interview at a couple of schools in India, but it is a much easier recruiting process for us to recruit in the US. I do want to make a point that we've seen an interesting shift in specifically with respect to Chinese students, because we do a lot of recruitment of Chinese students from US business schools, and they do internships in our Hong Kong office. And 2 years ago, there was a phenomenon that many of them got their summer experience in Hong Kong and wound up getting full-time offers, but decided to choose an offer in the US instead of going to Hong Kong to work closely with China. This past year, that phenomenon disappeared. I think China has become a very hot spot on the globe in terms of business development and business going forward. And we had no declines for people preferring US kinds of opportunities. I think students are very quick to see where opportunities lay. And I think those sorts of phenomena are starting to develop in India too, where people who previously would have wanted to be in the US now want to, even if they get their degrees in the US, may want to go back to India because they see that India is just on the verge of, it has been exploding, and they, have an opportunity to get in on,
No,
on their own economy where it's growing.
Of course, and I can understand the Indian MBA wanting to go back to India. In my own experience, I've come upon many Indian students, Chinese students, who get an education up at Harvard and want to stay in the United States. But turn that around. What about the American MBA, well-trained at the University of Toronto, saying to himself, herself, there's a great opportunity now in China. I ought to go there. Do you find that that is a new movement, perhaps?
I think we've always had a significant number of American students or North American students who would be interested in the overseas or international assignment. I think there's always been a very strong allure with that. We generally want people to have language capabilities, though, if they want that kind of assignment. So the person who wants to go to China because China is going to be great is like, we'd like you to be able to speak Mandarin because the clients there speak Chinese. Right. There are some jobs that can be done from our offices that can be done in English, but generally, if you're going to have a client-facing role, language capabilities are an important thing. Now, there are plenty of American students who have lived overseas, who have studied languages, and have become quite proficient. So those people are viable candidates for us, but generally just, sort of someone who's ready for the Chinese experience or the China experience without the language skills will probably be disappointed.
Thank you. I want to talk to you all now about ethics. And I would hope that we would not have to go into a definitional mode. What do we mean? What is, as we heard a year or so ago. But, ethics is another one of those buzzwords in higher education. There's no question that we've heard it at the Kennedy School where I teach. There's no question about it being a big deal at the Harvard Business School as well. And they're doing a lot of work there. Dean Martin, The Economist magazine, which is a pretty good magazine, asked recently, is the MBA responsible for the moral turpitude at the top? That caught my eye, I must admit. I expect you to say no, but explain your answer.
Sure. Well, it's an interesting article, and it's based on Sumantra Ghoshal's provocative paper, and I think it's an important paper to pay attention to. So I won't say just no completely, because I think it bears some thought. And I guess I do sort of parse the problem into pieces, and I think there's some things that we definitely need to do a better job on. So some of the activity that is considered unethical, I think there's a better term for it, which is unlawful. Right? A lot of what has now gone through the courts, so we know from WorldCom or Tyco, at least, and Enron, where there are actual convictions, that's just plain unlawful. And so, and what that spurred a lot of schools to do, ourselves included, is saying, you know, actually we do need to make sure that the students know something about business-oriented law, commercial law, because these were people just plain breaking the laws, and are we doing a good enough job in teaching them that? So that's one piece of it. But the other piece that I don't think we do a good enough job on is, I think there are a lot of people in the world of business, in the world generally, who want to be ethical, but who get stuck in a particular situation where they're, between a rock and a hard place, the devil in the deep blue sea, and they have a heck of a time making a choice at that time. And we know from decision making that when you get nervous and worried at that time, you make much worse decisions, and many that they live to regret for the rest of their lives. That's different from intentionally being unethical, saying, I know how to rip off this consumer and give them less than they want in a way that's legal, right, that doesn't cross the legal line.
But aren't we just talking there about a matter of degree, not kind?
Well, I mean, I think it's important. I think the law part is in some sense easier to teach because it's more codified. Right. I think what we need to do is help, rather than say we can somehow teach unethical people to be ethical, right, is to do a much better job on helping people in those situations where they are facing a difficult situation and don't have a good way of thinking their way through it. We need to help them out on that.
Okay, well, on these particular situations, Mr. Olsov, you wrote a fascinating piece about the Columbia Business School and a play that was done up there called Scenes from the Slippery Slope, which I loved. And apparently in one scene, a banker is pressured to do something illegal, unethical, in order to protect his boss who's involved in an extramarital affair. So you've got to fix the books in one way or another to make them look kosher. But how does this help produce a better MBA? I don't want to deal with definitions, and I don't want to deal with degrees of goodness. But when you are thinking about a business, Goldman Sachs or any other, in your own experience and your own reporting, first of all, how are the schools doing in their teaching of ethics in business? And how are the students taking to it, and what effect has it all had?
Boy, that's a lot. I could talk for half an hour.
Well, no, but then I'll give you 30 seconds.
Okay. Basically, I think the schools are struggling with how to best teach ethics. Some schools are requiring courses, some are still going the elective route, and some are trying to integrate it throughout the curriculum. In other words, have a unit in marketing, finance that has an ethics component to it. That's the trickiest and the one that Columbia had the most difficulty executing. Personally, I think they ought to do all three right now, given the state of corporate America's reputation. And I think you asked earlier, what can they do how can they help? I think MBA programs can help students find balance. That I think what you were talking about, the economist saying, was that, where they're blaming MBAs, which I don't think is fair truly at all, but I think what happened was people got carried away with trying to produce increasing profits, increasing stock prices, and they lost their perspective. And I think that MBA programs were blamed in part because they teach about enhancing shareholder value, and there was not the balance of saying, but there's more to running a business than just increasing shareholder value.
Yeah, but when you talk about losing your perspective, I mean, that's sort of a polite way of excusing what is obviously, whether it's an illegal action that is taken or a clearly immoral action that is taken, unethical action, it's unethical, it's wrong.
It truly is, yeah.
And where do you learn that? Do you learn that as a graduate student? Or do you learn that in diapers? I mean, at what point is this effort going to be a success? When you deal at Goldman Sachs with an issue, Ms. Hunter, how do you teach ethics to somebody who comes in at age 28?
Right. Well, I agree with you. I think it's much more the diaper phase of things. I think that people have their moral grounding set for them in their home environment by their parents. So, when you say, what can business schools do to teach ethics, I'm not sure that there is a whole lot that business schools can do to teach ethics. I think it's very incumbent upon the corporation, because I think people enter corporations and they see how people act around them, and they either decide that they're going to mirror that kind of behavior, or they will leave. They'll feel uncomfortable and they'll leave. So I think that it is very much incumbent upon corporations to teach reputation, to teach ethics. I love the title of your book because, we have, at Goldman Sachs, we don't make anything, we don't have any patents. We have 3 assets. We have our capital, our people, and our reputation. And we say if any of these are lost, our reputation is the hardest to repair. So it's probably our most important asset. So we incorporate it in our orientation sessions. We incorporate it in all of the different trainings that we give at rites of passage when people move from being an associate to a vice president, from a vice president to a managing director, from managing director to
no, you're not taking courses in this, though.
We have meetings. When you get promoted, you have a 2-day meeting, and we make sure we have a business principles segment in these things. When we do our orientation for our summer associates, our summer MBAs, they come and they spend an hour and a half on, cases of shades of gray and how do you treat these things and what are people at Goldman Sachs expected to do. Our chairman has spent, many hours. He's done 25 different sessions, 6-hour sessions apiece with all of the managing directors of the firm to make sure they understand what reputation and accountability means in the world that we know it. So I think it's important. I think it's sort of like, it's important for the business schools to say the words ethics, ethics, ethics so people hear it, but it's incumbent upon the corporations to set up the framework and to make sure that they have systems for when people feel like they're between a rock and a hard place, that they know how to ask for help, they know where their escape hatch is, and to set the environment appropriately.
Thank you. I appreciate that last answer very much. I want to raise the name and the ideas of Henry Mintzberg, who's a professor of management studies at McGill University nearby Montreal. He wrote a book called Managers, Not MBAs, a hard look at the soft practice of management and management development. This professor argues, and I quote, "Conventional MBA programs train the wrong people in the wrong ways with the wrong consequences." He calls the whole system decidedly dysfunctional. I'd like to have a show of hands, and I'll be able to see in the dark. How many of you, just raise your hand, how many of you agree that the system is decidedly dysfunctional? Not a one. Is there a one? There's a one. So that you all then agree, or most of you, that it works quite well. No. So there are problems. Right. Dean.
Yeah. Well,
the biggest problems that you have right now. Now, you can either respond to Professor Mintzberg or not, as you choose, but yeah. What are the biggest problems you face?
Well, I think the biggest problem is that we have focused on MBA education too much on teaching models in narrow silos that aren't connected to one another, so they don't mirror the real world. And what Henry Mintzberg doesn't like about MBAs is they come out as saying, oh, I guess this is a problem that this one tool applies best to, and then use that tool without consideration of anything else. So back to your shareholder value. If somebody says, well, shareholder value above all else with no other consideration whatsoever because somebody taught me that tool, they will make, if you will, extreme decisions, not decisions that are balanced in some important ways. And what I like least about the MBA world is that we do, to too great an extent, produce people who are tool choosers. So we come up with a toolbox and they say, oh, okay, this problem that I'm facing now, which tool is the best for dealing with this? As opposed to saying, either what tool do I have to build, brand new tool, or what combination of tools I have to build or I have to utilize to solve this problem well. So I think in that sense, business education is incomplete and has to too great an extent averted its eyes from the hardest problem, which is that problem, which is methodologically complex, theoretically complex, but why not go after that problem if it's the big one? So I'd argue he overstates it. He overstates it. In my mind, Henry overstates, and he'll say when interviewed on the book, I overstate for effect. But but I think there's something fundamentally more right than wrong about his critique.
Well, I have to quote you again on something that you said of your father, who was a very successful businessman, a moderately successful businessman, who never went to a business school.
Absolutely.
And you said, I learned more about business from him than from the Harvard Business School by a long shot. What about an awful lot of
I stand by my comments.
You stand by your comment, I'm sure you do. But what about all of the business people who are out there right now? Might they say the same thing? That they would learn a great deal more from someone who doesn't have an MBA but has the experience, who has actually been there and done it for many, many years, and is not absorbed with theory, but whose head is filled with experience and knowledge in that sense. So it really raises that question. The business school has addressed this to a degree in stressing that it would like to have 2 years, 3 years, 4 years of experience before you actually get into the school. But I'm now being told that a number of business schools and a number of universities are trying to encourage students to go directly from undergraduate training into the business school. And I don't have the name of the university in my mind right now, but there's a 3-year and a 2-year program, a 5-year program leading to both the baccalaureate degree, the undergraduate degree, and the 2-year Master's of Business Administration. But that has nothing to do, so far as I can understand it, with experience, does it?
Well, I would respond to your point and your quote. My father was not a successful businessman, so I had no one to learn business from. I had no one to be an apprentice to. I think an apprenticeship model is a terrific model, but it sort of limits access to people who know successful business people. And I think one of the great things about an MBA education is that it has an opportunity to change people's lives by giving people who don't have access to people who are willing to take the time and the energy to sit down and tell you how it's done in a practical way to, really broaden horizons. And, so in that regard, I think the MBA does a great service. I think, we had an interesting presentation before where someone asserted that the grades you get in school do not determine future success, but whether you go to school or not does determine future success, I believe. And it's a great way of leveling the playing field.
Absolutely.
Where, people come from different kinds of backgrounds and they have an opportunity
Absolutely.
to
Mr. Alsop, you wanted to contribute on that.
A lot of the criticism of MBA programs right now has to do with they're being too theoretical, not enough practical experience. While they're there, that they're not dealing with companies, bringing in enough guest speakers, getting into the real world of business while they're in their MBA program. But I have to say, in my research the past few years, going to schools and spending time with them, I think they are moving more in that direction. That the students are doing more real world experiences while they're in school.
You know that, Dean, Mark,
right.
go ahead.
Well, and I was going to say one way to do that is to have, as part of your faculty, experienced, successful business people who do love teaching students, and I think leavening the mix with those folks is something that makes lots of sense for business.
Let me try it from a different point of view, and it's kind of family history. But my father-in-law, who died a couple of years ago at the tender age of 96. And was quite wonderful up until the last month. My father-in-law was a graduate of the Wharton School in 1921. And he would talk to me about this subject quite often because he couldn't figure out why somebody so smart could be so dumb as to be a journalist. So he couldn't figure that out. But he would always say that when he was at Wharton, he really got his basic training in economics and in banking and basic stuff that he claimed was not really taught as it should be taught, in his judgment, today. And at DePaul University, business students can now take a course called Management at the Movies. They can study the Godfather series and look at all of the mobsters and use the mobsters as models for what they call organizational design. And they can also look at the movie Tora, 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 which was the story of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, to kick off a discussion of strategic planning. Now, really, Mr. Alsop, is that what has to be done in a classroom to attract and to hold the attention of students?
I don't think so.
No, I don't think so either. But, what the heck is going on then?
I will add to that I wrote a column a few months ago about some business schools, not saying they're right or wrong in doing this, but they're actually teaching spirituality in MBA programs.
What does that have to do with an MBA program?
I'm not sure exactly, but I think it's to try to make people find their true selves.
Their roots.
And go out into a career that will make them happy. But I'm not sure that that's necessarily.
Are you teaching spirituality
programs?
No.
At the University of Toronto?
No, and we don't have the movie making.
And no movie making,
No.
anything like that? I mean, you don't. This business, though, to be serious for a moment, is the idea. Do you have to do anything special now, as a professor, to hold the attention of an MBA student?
I think so, in the sense that the specialness that a professor can provide is something that is actionable for the students. So the professors who are the memorable ones, and probably your father-in-law's memorable ones, are the ones that provide them with knowledge that they can convert into action. And I think that's all that it takes, if you will. Now that's not easy, but it doesn't take being incredibly entertaining or taking them to the movies. But if it just imparts a kind of theory that the student in question can't say, if I were in this situation, this is how I could convert what you tell me into useful action, then the students, I think, are going to go to sleep. And if they can't do that, students will say, this is great.
Are we all conscious, and do we all agree that there has been a serious decline in applications for business schools? And I raise the question because I'm wondering, as I raise the question, whether it even has proper and accurate foundation. There appear to be now so many different kinds of business schools and different kinds of business degrees and executive programs. I mean, I know that because we have those at the Kennedy School as well, and you're not getting a master's in public administration, but you're getting a certificate from Harvard, and it kind of looks good.
Looks good.
Right? But is there, for the best schools, the best business schools, is there actually a decline in the number of applicants?
No, there definitely has been.
Has been.
Yes.
What would be your explanation, Mr. Alsop?
I think it had to do with the job market. I think that's what sparked it.
But the job market is getting better.
It's getting better, and the application declines aren't as severe as they were right now. But there was, for a couple of years, a sharp downturn as people started talking to other people about the fact that they were spending $100,000 on an MBA degree and they weren't coming out with much of a job. And so people were afraid to give up secure jobs. So then part-time programs started picking up more people, I think. And the full-time program suffered as a result. Now that there's signs that that may be turning.
Is there a danger, Dean Martin, that the business programs that are not the standard two-year programs of the sort that you run at your school, that they could be eating into the quality of the program in some way or another, hurting it?
Oh, I think so. I mean, I think that there's, you're right on the diversity of programs out there now, and I think online programs are going to definitely, are already and will continue to eat into the market share, if you will, of the in-classroom two-year programs, and it's partially because the three letters, regardless of what's behind them, have a signal of value to them. And so I think there is a market out there for people who say, I can get an MBA from my desk, never go to school, do it all online, and all I need is the three letters. And that's created a segment of the market that's eaten away at the rest of the market. And it's not good for the MBA as a degree. And that's why I think what's happening more and more is that people are going to ask, you know, is it Harvard MBA, is it Wharton MBA, not just is it an MBA?
I just
Mr.
wanted to
Also.
make a point there. In our new survey this year, we asked recruiters what they think of the different types of degrees. And I don't know that just having those 3 letters is enough, really, because they said that, I think it was 80% of the recruiters said that they would not consider an online degree anywhere near comparable to a full-time MBA degree. They called it MBA Light.
But
MBA Light.
I don't think the students know that yet.
I don't think they do either.
I think it's going to take them a few years to figure out that reaction by the employers.
Ms. Hunt, do the people at Goldman Sachs know that, though? Are they
Yes.
aware of the MBA from University of Toronto, Harvard, Wharton, whatever, and these online MBAs?
Yes, there is clearly a differentiation, a distinction. The reason we go to MBA schools to recruit is because that's where the talent pool is. For us, not only do you get people with an education, but you get a highly motivated, pre-screened population of people who want to do the jobs that we have to offer. And, you know, through an online MBA, it's, you know, they may know how to do accounting and economics, but they haven't done it. And, you know, a good collegial collaborative setting, they have not gotten the experiences of their peers who are all coming together to talk through the different case studies.
We've only got a couple of minutes to go in our program, and I wanted to raise a question very much on my mind, and perhaps not on yours at all, but I see a conflict between what I am going to call personal greed for a minute and social responsibility. And what business schools can do to narrow this divide. And I ask it because as a professor at the Kennedy School, I know that our graduates go out and, if they're lucky, get $40,000 to $50,000 a year. And right across the Charles River, the same blue and white dome, the students are graduating and getting $90,000 to $120,000 a year. And you explained earlier about the desire for a better job and more money, and that being the yardstick. But is there not something that the business school ought to also be injecting into the mind of the student, that there is out there a society that has to be helped? There are lots of poor people. There are serious social problems. And Dean Martin, I'm not picking on you, truly, but you are my dean.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering if maybe this has nothing to do with business school. You could just argue, you know, go home, Marvin, and bug off. But is there something to it?
There absolutely is, and I think business schools have to teach students about that linkage, and again, and how to handle that potential conflict. And if the business world doesn't handle that well, the business world will suffer. So if we aren't producing students who have a way of thinking their way through that important question in a productive way, we won't be doing our job.
Ms. Hunt, do you find that to be the case?
I see many, many resumes in the course of a year, and I would say that probably 75% or 80% of them have some kind of volunteerism or community service or orientation there. So I'm not sure whether that's officially school-sponsored. It's certainly school-facilitated. But I think that the MBA students themselves, whether they're building houses for Habitat for Humanity or they're doing other kinds of public service programs, it comes across loud and strong, and I think we have to make sure that we offer that as a firm so that people can continue to realize a degree of social responsibility in addition to the business. People want to be whole people. They don't want to be, you know, just channeled.
At this point, I want to thank the Graduate Management Admission Council and the graduate management industry for sponsoring our discussion today, for supporting it. I also want to thank CIUT Radio, TV Ontario, XM Satellite Radio, PBS Channel 32 in Washington, D.C., and the Voice of America for carrying our discussion. Our co-sponsors, as usual, are the George Washington University, the National Press Club, and the Shorenstein Center on the Press, Politics, and Public Policy at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. I'm Marvin Kalb saying goodbye and good luck from Toronto, Canada.